$23,000. That's the number on the confirmation screen at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and you read it 3 times before you believe the comma is in the right place. Your apartment is dark except for the laptop. The radiator ticks. Outside, someone's car alarm goes off and stops. You have just bought a single ticket to the 2026 World Cup final at MetLife Stadium, Section 118, and everything that surrounds it, and the cursor is blinking on a button that says, Confirm Purchase, and your thumb is on the trackpad, and you are not clicking it, and you are not closing it either. You've wanted this since you were 9. That's the tension. Not whether you can afford it. You can, technically. That's what makes it dangerous. The tension is that some part of you already knows this money is 2 things at once, and you can only spend it on one of them. Let's back up, because the number didn't start at $23,000. It started at $7,000, which was the cheapest final ticket you could find that wasn't a scam, the ones behind the corner flag where you'd watch the whole thing at an angle. FIFA's official resale had them listed higher. The good seats, the midfield ones, ran past $40,000, and the hospitality packages went into 6 figures before anyone had kicked a ball. You told yourself $7,000 was reasonable. Then you did the thing every superfan does. You started adding flights, because it's the final and you're not doing a red-eye connection with a layover in Charlotte. Round trip, decent seat, $680. A hotel near the stadium for 4 nights, because host city hotels tripled their rates the moment the bracket was set, and the reasonable places were gone by winter. $2,400 for a room you'll sleep in maybe 14 hours total. Food, which sounds trivial until you're paying $19 for a stadium beer and $34 for a sandwich, because you're a captive audience and everyone in that building knows it. A jersey, the good scarf, a ticket to a group stage match earlier in the trip, because if you're flying across the country, you're not seeing one game. And the seat itself climbed. You didn't stay at $7,000. You never do. Because you told yourself, this is once. This is the only time it'll be in your country in your lifetime, probably. You are allowed one perfect thing. So the $7,000 seat became a $14,000 seat, and by the time you'd stacked the flights and the hotel and the food and the group stage game and the parking that costs more than your monthly car payment, the confirmation screen said $23,000. You have $31,000 in savings. This is 74% of it. Your roommate is Sarah. She's an ICU nurse who works 3/12s and sleeps like it's a competitive sport. She has watched you talk about this World Cup for 4 years the way other people talk about a person they're in love with. She knows your alarm is set to a vuvuzela. She knows you cried when the host cities were announced. And 2 weeks ago, when you first started building the trip in a spreadsheet at the kitchen table, she looked over your shoulder at the running total, said nothing, and went to bed. That was the silent detail. She didn't tell you not to. You didn't ask her to talk you out of it. You both understood something in that moment that neither of you said, and it's still sitting between you, unspoken, in the apartment right now while the cursor blinks. You don't click confirm. You close the laptop. You tell yourself you'll decide in the morning. You don't decide in the morning. You decide over 11 days, and the deciding is the whole story. Here's what happened the next afternoon. You were at your desk. You're a project manager at a logistics software company. $71,000 a year, which after taxes and rent and the car and the student loan, leaves you with roughly $900 a month that isn't already spoken for. You opened a compound interest calculator. You've never done this before, not really. You typed in $23,000. You set the return to 7%, which is the conservative long-run number people use for a diversified stock index after you strip out inflation. Not the flashy number, the honest one. You set the years to 20. You did not add a single dollar after the initial deposit. You just let it sit. $88,996. You stared at it. You almost closed the tab. Because that number does something to the ticket that you can't undo. That $23,000, if you drop it into a low-cost index fund, something that just buys a slice of the entire market and charges you almost nothing to do it, and then you forget it exists for 20 years, becomes roughly $89,000. And you didn't do anything to earn the extra $66,000. You didn't work for it. You just didn't touch it. That's the concept nobody teaches you at 9 years old when you fall in love with a sport. Opportunity cost isn't what a thing costs. It's what the money could have become if you'd done something else with it. The ticket doesn't cost $23,000. The ticket costs $89,000, because that's the version of the future you're choosing not to have. You sat with that for a while. And then something in you pushed back, and the pushing back is important because a script that just tells you to buy the index fund is lying to you about how being a person works. You called your dad. You didn't plan to. He picked up on the second ring the way he always does, like he was already holding the phone. You told him the number, not the $23,000, the $89,000. You expected him to do the math with you, to be the voice of the calculator. Your dad drove a delivery route for 31 years. He knows the value of a dollar in a way that lives in his hands. He was quiet. Then he said, "You know, I never saw my father's country play. He talked about it his whole life. I could have taken him in '94 when it was here. Tickets were $40. I said next time." He let that sit. There wasn't a next time. You didn't say anything. That was the second silent detail, the one across a phone line. Compound interest works on regret too. It just runs in the other direction. Over the next few days, you did the thing the calculator wanted you to do, which is to make the money real in both directions. You have to hold both. Most people can only hold one. The people who never invest can only feel the joy of the ticket. The people who never live can only feel the growth of the fund. The whole trick is standing in the room where both are true and not looking away from either. So you built the honest version of the spreadsheet, not the one that wins the argument, the one that tells the truth. Column A was the trip. $23,000, gone, converted into 4 days you will remember on your deathbed probably, if it's the kind of final that goes to penalties. A story you'll tell for the rest of your life. The specific weight of being in a stadium of 80,000 people the moment a nation scores. That's not nothing, that's arguably everything. Economists have a clumsy word for it. They call it experiential consumption, and there's actual research, real longitudinal studies, showing that people derive more lasting satisfaction from experiences than from objects, that a trip outlasts a television in the part of the brain that generates happiness. The joy of a thing you own decays. The joy of a thing you did appreciates. It compounds in its own way. Column B was the fund. $88,996 in 20 years, at which point you'd be 51. Enough to matter. Not enough to retire on, but enough to change a year of your life somewhere down the line. Enough, maybe, to take your own kid to a World Cup and not think about the number. And then you notice the thing the spreadsheet couldn't decide, which is the thing no spreadsheet can ever decide. And this is where you stop being someone who is afraid of money and started being someone who understood it. The spreadsheet can tell you what $23,000 becomes. It cannot tell you what you become. It can't price the version of you that always said next time. You called Sarah into the kitchen. You showed her both columns. She looked at it for a long moment. She'd just come off a 12, her scrub still on, exhausted in the specific way of someone who watches other people's endings for a living. And she said the thing that reorganized the entire problem. You're treating it like it's $23,000 or $89,000. It's not. Those aren't the two choices. She was right. And this is the part the calculator hides from you. Because here's what you'd missed. The all-or-nothing framing was a trap. You didn't have to spend $23,000 or invest $23,000. The trip had a dozen versions between the $7,000 seat and the $40,000 seat, and you'd talked yourself into the most expensive one by telling yourself it was the only real one. That's not economics. That's a story you told yourself to justify a feeling. So you took the spreadsheet apart. The $14,000 seat became the $7,000 seat, behind the corner flag, where you'd watch the whole thing at an angle, and you realized you didn't care about the angle, you cared about being in the building. You cut the hotel from 4 nights to 2 and moved 20 minutes out. You kept the group stage match because that was the joy, that was never the part to cut. You kept the flight, you kept the scarf. The trip came to $11,200, and the other $11,800 went into the index fund on a Thursday, and you felt almost nothing when you clicked confirm on that one, which surprised you, because 6 months ago, $11,800 was a number you couldn't have looked at without your chest tightening. At 7% for 20 years, that $11,800 becomes $45,660. Not the whole $89,000, about half. Half the future and the whole trip, the real one, the one you actually wanted, stripped of the part that was just fear of missing out wearing the costume of a dream. That's the reframe. The choice was never between the experience and the money. The choice was between the honest experience and the inflated one. The inflation wasn't in the ticket price, it was in you. You didn't tell your dad you cut the seat. You told him you were going. He said good, and then he said take a picture at the entrance, the whole entrance, so I can see how big it is. And you understood that he was not going to say the other thing, the thing about his own father, and you were not going to make him, and that was the third silent detail, and it was the loudest one. Now, here's where it would be easy to end, triumphant, balanced, the wise middle path. But that's not what happened, and this channel doesn't lie to you about endings. Because there was a fourth column you hadn't looked at, and it belonged to someone else. His name is Jake. You went to college with him. He's the friend everyone has, the one who never spends money on anything, who drives a 2011 Corolla with 190,000 miles, who brought his own coffee to your wedding. When the World Cup tickets went on sale, Jake texted the group chat a screenshot of a spreadsheet and the words, "Invested my ticket money instead, lol. See you all at 51. Everyone laughed. Everyone thumbs-upped it. Jake was the responsible one. Jake was the guy your calculator would have made you into. You went to the final. Section 118 became section 341, upper corner, and you were wrong about the angle. It didn't matter. None of it mattered, because in the 118th minute, a 19-year-old you'd never heard of scored the goal that ended it, and 80,000 people made a sound you felt in your sternum, a physical pressure, and you were screaming, and you didn't know you were crying until a stranger from another country hugged you, and you hugged him back, and neither of you spoke the same language, and it didn't matter. You took the picture of the entrance. You sent it to your dad. He wrote back one word, finally. You still don't know if he meant the World Cup, or you, or him, and you've never asked. That was the fourth silent detail, and it's the one you still carry. You came home changed in the small, permanent way that real experiences change people, and you did not regret the $11,200, not for 1 second, not even when the credit card statement came. But here's the valley. Here's the part that separates the people who understand money from the people who only understand math. 6 months later, Jake's dad had a stroke. And in the weeks after, sitting in a different ICU than the one Sarah works in, Jake told you something in a hospital cafeteria at 2 in the morning over a coffee he did not bring from home. He said his dad had asked him, years ago, to go to a game together, any game, and Jake had always said it cost too much, always ran the numbers, always chose the fund, and now his dad couldn't tell a striker from a stranger, and the fund was worth $34,000, and Jake would have set it on fire in the parking lot for one afternoon in a stadium with the version of his father that used to exist. The comparison character isn't the cautionary tale you thought he was. Neither is he a hero. That's the whole point. Jake did everything right by the calculator, and the calculator was measuring the wrong thing. And you did something the calculator hated, and it turned out to be the thing you'll defend on your own deathbed. But it could just as easily have gone the other way. Sarah's father is alive and well, and thinks the World Cup is a waste of a good afternoon. There's no rule here. There's no rule for this part. This part just hurts, and it's supposed to. So here's the philosophy underneath all the arithmetic, and it's the only thing worth taking from any of this. Money is stored time. Every dollar you have is an hour you traded for it. And when you invest, you're sending time forward, telling your future self, here, I saved this for you. That's real, and it's wise, and you should do it. But there is a specific arrogance in assuming the future self is the one who deserves it. The future is not guaranteed to arrive. The present is the only tense that's ever actually happened. And the skill, the real skill, the one no calculator has, is knowing which dollars to send forward and which ones to spend on the version of your life that only exists right now, at this age, with these people, while this specific window is open. The actionable version, because philosophy without a number is just a feeling. Build both columns before every large purchase. Not to win the argument, to see the whole board. Run the 20-year compound number, because you deserve to know the real price. And then run the other column, the one that asks what window is closing, and whether this is a next time thing, or a there won't be a next time thing. Then choose with your eyes open. The math is easy. The knowing which column matters more is the entire art of being alive with money in your hands. It's Tuesday night again. Same apartment, same radiator ticking, same laptop, though the screen is different now. It's your brokerage account, and there's $19,340 in the index fund, the $11,800 from the World Cup plus what you've added since, plus the growth you didn't earn and didn't touch. The scarf is hanging on the back of your door. The picture of the stadium entrance is your phone's lock screen. Sarah's asleep down the hall. Your dad texted you a photo of nothing in particular today, just his garden, which is how he says he's thinking about you. You know now that the $23,000 was never the real number. Neither was the $89,000. The real number was the one you couldn't see on any confirmation screen. What a thing is worth, and when, and to whom, and whether the window is still open. And nobody, no fund, no calculator, no channel can price that for you. Jake's dad is still alive. Jake still hasn't taken him anywhere, and you still don't know if that's a mistake or just a window that hasn't closed yet. Some things you buy, some things you send forward. The hard part is you never know which was right until it's too late to choose again.